Hi, I am Liz Powell. I am the founder and head of G2G Consulting, which stands for Government to Growth. I wanted to kick things off today, providing some background on what we're going to cover, which is on the next slide, please. And then go over some background on funding sources, how the system works. And then I'm going to pass it over to my esteemed colleague, Greg Kapcar, who's going to go into detail about the MHSRS, which is the largest annual military medical conference. Phenomenal networking conference, just a great way to develop relationships. And so we're really excited to share details on it, and very hopeful that this year it will be back on in person because they had to cancel it the past 2 years due to COVID. And then really excited, we're going to have an esteemed colleague who has presented at MHSRS a few times. He has presented at many conferences and has developed some really valuable relationships with the Department of Defense, including securing funding. He is going to be our guest speaker today, and he's going to share his experiences of how he started to work with the DoD, what he's learned, what he has seen with the MHSRS conference that can be most valuable for other companies. So super, super excited to hear from Vikash later in this webinar. And then we'll just close out with Q&A. So as we're speaking, think of your questions, get them ready. We are excited to answer them and to have this be as valuable as possible for you today. So this is the agenda, what we're going to cover as I just went over. So I think you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so G2G stands for Government to Growth. I started it 15 years ago, 2007. I met a lot of entrepreneurs and some nonprofits that were doing great things, but they didn't know how to access funding and navigate that government process. And so with my background, I was a legislative director on the Hill for several years. I worked for a couple different members. One, I staffed the Small Business Committee. The other, I staffed the Armed Services Committee. I also did a lot of health policy. And so brought all that together to provide that bridge for these entrepreneurs, startups, and some nonprofits that were trying to access funding, trying to work with the government. And so since we started, we've raised over $322 million non-dilutive funding for our clients. Many are in that biosciences, life sciences space. So that is a definite niche for us. And related to that, we've also developed a niche in tracking grant opportunities. And we have an amazing team that does that. And we produce our GBG Report, or GBG Reporting Service, which is the Government Bioscience Grants Report. So we track all the different funding opportunities that are coming out each month, and we put it all together. So that is readily available for our clients. We also do a monthly call to make sure that we're explaining some of these opportunities, and it makes it easier for people to digest. We do a ton of other things, though. We do CMS reimbursement, we do policy and legislative campaigns, grassroots organizing. A lot of education needs to happen with Congress if you're going to change policies or access funding. So we do an awful lot of that. We work with national clients, and then we have a special niche in the Midwest. So we have our Midwest office in Cleveland. We also have a Columbus office, does a lot of state work there. And then we're also based in DC and Virginia. We work with national clients. We work with probably over half the states with different initiatives over the years. So we have these various affiliations that we think are of particular interest to you all, and that is the bio chapter. So there's the National Bio Organization, and then they have these state chapters. And so we work with some of these different state chapters. And then we're really active with some of the defense organizations that are really good at generating access to some key program managers and leadership within Department of Defense. So we've just listed some of those different sort of affiliations that we have. We also, while we don't physically have an office in Pittsburgh, we have satellite operations in Pittsburgh. So we do quite a bit in Western PA as well. So I want to make sure I called that out. So that's just our background, bipartisan government affairs firm with a real focus on non-dilutive funding. Next slide, please. Okay, so the categories of funding. People often ask, well, how do you get the funding? How does it work? Well, here's the basics. There's grant funding, there's getting written into legislation, there's discretionary contracts, and then there's procurement contracts. So That is it. Those are the 4 categories. And as you can see with this pie chart, where the bulk of the money goes in our budget, it is defense. So if there is a way to have a bioscience innovation connect with military needs, or what they call their requirements, then you are golden. That is a great way to access critical R&D funding and to then turn that into procurement longer term. So that is why we focus a lot on DoD opportunities, because there's just so many funding opportunities. There's also different kinds of funding that you get through DoD that you can't get from the other agencies. So we definitely cover all the agencies. We go after all different funding sources, but today, we're going to talk about defense, because I think a lot of people are confused and not sure where to start. And there, as I said, there's just so many opportunities. So next slide, please. Okay, so the systems. So basically, this slide is an attempt to explain very high level how it all works. So first, the White House has to produce their budget, and that is run through OMB, Office of Management and Budget. They draft that in July. So very, very early in the process. They finalize December, January with the different departments and agencies, and then they unveil it in February. Next, Congress takes that apart and comes up with their own priorities of how they want to spend money in their appropriation bills. And they do 12 appropriation bills every year. And recently they've brought back earmarks. In fact, this past year, they put them in the bills, although the bills have not been enacted. So they are behind schedule, but they have an awful lot of say in directing funding. So what the White House produces, their budget is really a proposal, whereas what Congress produces is the law. Congress also produces a budget resolution sometimes, not always, and it is not binding in the way that the appropriations bills are. And these 12 appropriation bills, they move through the House first, then the Senate, and then they come together in conference committee to come up with a final version. In recent years, they are doing omnibus bills instead of separate 12 appropriation bills. So that's what we're seeing more and more of, these huge packages with everything thrown in there. In that, they can include things where they list all the diseases that they want the CDMRP program or Congressionally Directed Military Research Program to fund. They can say some new initiative that they want NIH to focus on. They can have NSF direct certain research dollars in areas. So there's a ton of power within those appropriation bills that I think a lot of folks don't realize. They just track once that grant comes out. So I wanted to make sure I highlighted that. The other thing that has to get done every year, in addition to those 12 appropriation bills, is the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act. And so that piece of legislation is also a great opportunity to include language. For example, in this year, there's a requirement that they create a whole digital health strategy. Well, that opens a lot of doors to digital health companies, for example. So there are opportunities within that bill as well. So then this last row are the departments and agencies. And so they are implementing the laws, they're implementing grant programs, new authorizations. And so there's all these different forms, whether it's a grant, BAA is broad agency announcement, a program announcement, which means it's specific to a certain area, like it could be trauma care program announcement, it could be burn care. There's SBIRs, which covers all the different agencies, and DoD in particular has their own SBIRs. There's contracts, and then there's pilot programs. So as you can see, there's tons of different avenues to access funding through the departments and agencies. So the funding really starts at the top and moves through and comes out through these agencies. And then sometimes there are extra funds, because whether a grant recipient couldn't execute, or Congress gives what they call restoral funds, which is usually the spring of every year, suddenly the DoD has even more money to spend, and they can spend that through consortiums like MTech. They can spend it through broad agency announcements or BAAs. They can spend it through program announcements. So there are lots of different opportunities. And the short of it is developing relationships within DoD, understanding those program managers, what their priorities are, what the leadership is working on, will enable you to have a much stronger application. And with DoD, they usually have two-pronged submission process. And so with that first prong, it is those program managers that are determining whether or not they want to select you to make a full proposal. So again, it's just really important to understand what they are thinking, develop these relationships before you make any submission. And how do you do that? MHSRS. It's a great opportunity to meet in person, to have them understand your technology, your innovation, and for you to hear what they're focused on, to really align that as much as possible. So I think that covers that slide. Next slide, please. Okay. Federal departments and key conferences. So there are many other departments beyond Department of Defense. We want to make sure we're giving you a thorough overview. A lot of folks, for example, they know NIH, but they maybe aren't as familiar with BARDA. Although I think BARDA became a very commonplace name during the whole COVID pandemic. It is focused on Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority is what it stands for. And it's focused on sort of first response and mass casualty response. They've got all these different programs and all these different acronyms, but the short of it is it's a great way to access funding to develop your innovation for first response. They traditionally, they have preferred later stage part of development, and they do contracts as opposed to grants. Also, the decision makers are those same program managers, although they're called chiefs in that division. And so again, it's really important to understand what they're thinking, what they're looking for before you make a submission. And in fact, BARDA starts with a tech watch before you even make a submission in order to ensure you're gaining that intel and understanding what their needs are. And if you have questions about that, you can shoot me or Greg an email or talk to us offline about that. But BARDA can be a great fit for some. NSF, National Science Foundation, they don't care what kind of science you're in. They just want to know that it's innovative, that it's going to transform society. And so a lot of health innovation can find a nice home in NSF. They also have a super easy pitch system to find out quickly whether you're a match or not with a shorter submission before you do that longer submission. So that can be very attractive. DOE, Department of Energy, also has SBIRs, ARPA-E, and there's been some nice overlap with health and energy lately. And we're actually good friends with the chair of the subcommittee for energy and water, who's always been pushing more alignment. For example, the supercomputing capabilities at the labs that are run by DOE are great partners for health. So there's a lot of doors that are opening within that department that people may not be aware of. Again, shoot us an email. We can talk offline about that. DoD, we're talking in depth about DoD, so no need to say more there. And then VA. So the VA does have research funding, but it is much smaller and it requires a VA PI. So there has to be a doctor within the VA system to lead that research. So that can be less attractive for some companies. However, if you can do a pilot project once approved by the FDA, it is a good way to raise your profile, get some good data, and then use that to sell more broadly. So that can still be an attractive partner. And then finally, these conferences. So we're talking at length about MHSRS today. My colleague Greg is going to take over in a minute here and cover that. SOMSA is focused on trauma response as well. That happens every year. We've got the AARCs, the cancer one. BARDA has their own conference every fall. TechConnect, there's Defense TechConnect. So there are other conferences where we're seeing more and more department program managers attending and even speaking at. So those can be ways to network as well. But we're really driving home MHSRS because that is by far the best. You're going to have all the DoD and the VA leadership there. And even we're seeing more and more FDA, HHS folks as well. So with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Greg.
Thanks a lot, Liz. That is a wonderful foundation for us to build on and go a little bit deeper. So Braden, if you can go to the next slide, please. And I want to start off, Liz had mentioned our government bioscience grants report, our service for tracking grant opportunities. And we do a compilation of monthly opportunities in the bioscience and high-tech industries. And it's kind of a curated service from multiple sources. And the report itself contains a quick summary of title and opportunity number, and specifically focused on recently released opportunities. And we'll also flag those that are released as pre-announcements so that researchers have a sense of what's coming up. There's a nice short description so that you know what it's about, along with some deadlines, when proposals are due, or if a letter of intent is required. And then we also include the funding levels, and most importantly, a hyperlink that actually gets you to the announcement. I wanted to just mention quickly that on the third Friday of every month, we offer our GBG Highlights Call and Screen Share for 30 minutes each month. And we scroll through the report and just give highlights on what's new, what might be repetitive, but what's coming up. We'll also have a casual Q&A. And so all are invited to that. It's once you register, you can attend future webinars as you like. We typically get about 30 to 50 people. And I will just kind of quickly say, because I see some familiar faces and names, I should say, in the attendance list that attend these monthly calls, and the calls are free. And we just recently announced that in February, we will start charging for the GBG Report service for non-clients. And that's primarily because there's quite a bit of resources and time committed to this. But I will say, and want to make sure I mention, that if your company is a member of any of those bio chapters that we work with, so for example, Bio Ohio, Virginia Bio, Bio Utah, if you're a member of those associations, you as a member benefit get the report for free. But if your company is part of a chapter or association that's not a member yet and want to work with us, we can talk to you offline about it. But we do provide that opportunity. So I just wanted to mention that, and we can go on to the next slide, please, Braden. So Liz has mentioned some of these, and I just want to take a little bit of time to go a little bit deeper into them. And we find that companies are interested a lot in grant funding. They tend to know NIH, as Liz mentioned, and are familiar with SBIRs and STTRs. So a great source is grants.gov. You're probably most familiar with that site. SAM.gov is this one-stop shop where you can register your company to be able to apply and receive money from the government. It also provides listings of contract opportunities, contract data reports, wage determinations. It's pretty extensive, and in some ways not very user-friendly, but you kind of have to slog through it. You do have to have a CAGE code to sign up for SAM.gov. Any company that is pursuing business or doing work with the government or getting grants, you have to have a CAGE code. And that's free registration, and you can do the registration through sam.gov. And then you also need a DUNS number, but interestingly enough, wanted to mention that as of April 4th of this year, the federal government is transitioning away from the use of DUNS numbers and towards the new unique entity ID as the primary means of identification for federal awards that are government-wide. So if you are registered in sam.gov, you've already got a new unique entity ID, which they're calling UEIDs, and you can view that through your sam.gov registration. But I wanted to make sure if you're new to this, you're going to have to kind of know that stuff off the bat. Liz mentioned NSF, and I want to spend a little bit of time on the America's Seed Fund because she mentioned this project pitch. This is a wonderful opportunity for startups and small companies because you can get quick feedback on a proposal before you actually start the laborious process of putting together a phase 1 project. And the pitch submission is actually required before you can submit an official SBIR request through NSF. And it's relatively short. So when you describe your technology or your innovation, it's 500 words or less. You have to describe your objectives and challenges in 500 words or less. Your market opportunity in 250 words, and the company and your team in 250 words. So these are generally not heavy lifts for smaller companies, and it's a great way to get your ideas in front of them. And if it's a good fit, you'll get an official invitation to actually submit a full proposal to NSF. And there are 30 different areas of interest that they have. And I just want to give you a smattering of those to spark your interest and see where there might be some overlap. But they accept proposals in advanced manufacturing, biological and medical technologies, digital health, energy and environmental technologies, the Internet of Things, medical devices, nanotechnology, pharmaceutical technology, robotics, and then they have this catch-all of other. So if you don't see a category specifically for your technology, you can submit it to other and see what they say. I'll also mention that a company can only have one project pitch in at any one time in front of NSF. Liz mentioned BARDA, and again, that has taken prominent stage here through the pandemic. So they're really focused on developing vaccines, drugs, therapies, and other diagnostic tools with a specific focus on medical countermeasures. And CARB-X is a program under BARDA that's focused on antimicrobial resistance and developing new antibiotics that combat drug-resistant bacteria. And then this BARDA Drive stands for their Division of Research, Innovation, and Ventures. And they've got an easy BAA, or broad agency announcement, where the technology readiness level is a little bit lower than that is required for their big BAA. And these are for awards under $750,000. So we can go to the next slide. This is just another sampling of other sources of funding opportunities. So I want to highlight a few. The USAMRDC is the Army's Medical Research and Development Command, and they're responsible for medical research, development, and acquisition. And in fact, as you hear from Vikash later on, this was an avenue that we've pursued heavily on behalf of Centerline Biomedical, and it has actually led to ultimately a contract that they've received here recently. But MRDC has different directorates, and they cover infectious disease, combat casualty care, operational medicine, chemical, biological defense, and then blast injury research. Liz mentioned CDMRP, or this Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. Definitely want to make sure you're aware of this. They put out a ton of research opportunities that range in funding from a couple $100,000 to several million. This again is promoting medical research to address military needs. But the interesting thing about CDMRP is that your research has to have a dual purpose. So they don't just want it for military impact, they want it to also apply to the general public at large. And so Congress appropriates these monies, and they also set the research topic levels. And there are about 40 different categories. And sometimes you may look at this and say, wow, these aren't really military relevant, but there are things like, if you think about it long enough, they are. So there are alcohol and substance abuse, autism. There are several categories within cancer that range from breast and kidney and lung, ovarian, pancreatic, rare cancers. And in fact, G2G was in a pretty heavy lobbying campaign to get rare cancers added to that list. There are things like multiple sclerosis, burn, peer medical research, traumatic brain injury, vision. So just a whole host of opportunities. DARPA. So DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, they have been called the agency that has shaped the modern world. So we know, we live and breathe some of these things that have come from DARPA, like the internet, Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine, weather satellites, GPS systems, drones, voice interfaces, personal computer. DARPA can claim at least partial credit for any of these innovations and more. I've also heard some say that it's not about building a better mousetrap when it comes to DARPA, it's about making the impossible possible. So a frustration for companies when working with DARPA is, if you're coming to them with an idea of something that is already being done and you're just going to tweak it and make it better, they're not going to be interested in it. They want ideas that no one else is doing and that almost look impossible to do. And there are a couple ways to get your funding opportunities through DARPA, and you can contact us offline for that. Liz mentioned MTech, the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium. This is so the USA, with the Army's Medical Research and Development Command that I mentioned earlier, is the primary customer for MTech. And MTech is a membership consortium, and they put out solicitations that are called requests for prototype proposals. And this gives the members the opportunity to propose these prototype technologies and get them funded in kind of like a medium level, TRL level and above. And the interesting thing about MTech is they use what are called other transaction authorities or agreements. And these other transaction authorities give the DoD some flexibility that they need to adopt and incorporate business practices that really reflect the commercial industry standards. And so it's a way that the DoD can kind of get this money out quicker than they might be able to do through other channels. And you do have to be a member to join MTech. You have to be a member for MTech, but if you're going to make a submission, you have to be a member. But the interesting thing about that is they will let you see the solicitations without being a member. And then they'll prorate your membership depending on when you join in the year. So next slide. Okay, military health system. We're getting there. We're gonna close out here with the MHSRS conference, and then Vikash will talk. But this is really just a slide intended to give you the scope and breadth of the military health system that serves over 9 million beneficiaries. And think back to that pie chart that Liz said, and the biggest piece of the pie chart that go to DoD. So let's go to the next slide, Braden. Here's some basics that you'll have at your fingertips. We'll make these slides available later, but just wanted to quickly mention that the Army Futures Command, that's the arm of the military that's aimed at modernizing the Army. And they're looking at like precision, long range, next gen vehicles, soldier lethality, things like that. But Defense Health Agency, that's really one to be keyed in on. And that's the joint operation between the Army, Navy, and Air Force. And basically they're responsible for medical services to provide a medically ready force, and well as providing health services. We've talked about some of these funding opportunities. I won't go back through them. And then just as a reminder at the bottom here, this ties back to what Liz talked about as far as the appropriations process and NDAA. It's all connected, and knowing all of this and working kind of the avenues will position you for engaging and collaborating with the DoD. So let's go to the next slide. So what is the Military Health System Research Symposium? This is the DoD's premier military and civilian research meeting. It brings together academia and industry and the military's leadership and their primary investigators. There are about 3,500 to 4,000 attendees, again, assuming that they're going to be back in person. They're saying they're going to be back in person this year. They did cancel it the last 2 years because of COVID and did not offer a virtual option. But this is a phenomenal venue to do networking and presenting your new scientific ideas to leadership and decision makers and program managers. And if you have any innovation that has a relevance to meeting military medical gaps in combat casualty care or operational medicine, clinical and rehabilitative medicine, medical simulation, infectious disease, this is the conference for you. There are over 60 breakout sessions that are now accepting abstracts. And if you're not selected to present in a breakout session, odds are great that you'll be selected to present as to do a poster presentation. There are also opportunities to become a vendor, and you can set up a booth at the exhibit hall if your company is interested in that. Next slide. This just shows what the website looks like if you're going to make a submission. Abstracts are due by February 16th. And then from this slide, or from that portion of the website, you can actually view the breakout sessions and submit your abstract. You do have to set up a free account to actually submit, and you don't want to wait until the last minute to set up your account when you want to make a submission. So get your account set up way in advance of actually wanting to sit down and send your abstract to them. Their website can be a little clunky at times, so you just be ready for that. Next slide. Okay, so I've already mentioned about setting up your account. This shows that there are some character limits in what you submit, but some key considerations if you're thinking about submitting this year, that abstracts should present research data and conclusions. It cannot accept product promotion. So if you're going there to just do a sales pitch and want to present in front of the whole conference, they will not consider sales pitches. And then your abstract should and must be representing original unpublished work. And then if you're not selected to present in a breakout session, you'll be considered for a poster presentation. And when you consider the body of the abstract, the 8,000 characters does include spaces. And there's really not a format for it, but we recommend that you include a background, scientific rationale, technical approach, a methods section, results, and specifically how is it significant to the warfighter, and then your conclusions. You'll also need to upload a conflict of interest statement and then the CV of anybody that's presenting. So I know that we've burned through a lot of information at one time. I want to leave the balance of the time for Vikash to talk to you. So I'm going to turn it back to Liz for his introduction, and then we'll take some questions and answers, do some Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. So as I said at the top of this webinar, we're super excited to have Vikash Goel join us today. He has quite an impressive background. He spent 10 years at the Cleveland Clinic and is in their Heart and Vascular Institute. He is an entrepreneur. He has grown this business, Centerline Biomedical, significantly since he started. It's actually a really impressive success story. He's been selected 3 times to present an abstract at MHSRS. He is a 3-time winner of the Defense TechConnect Innovation Award and was named in 2021 as a notable entrepreneur by Cleveland Cranes. So he's a great leader. He has done some amazing, innovative things with this technology. And I've had the joy of knowing Vikash for several years and navigating DoD together and seeing how well he works with different program managers to listen to what they're interested in and then adjust how he is presenting the capabilities of his technology, which is really, really key. So super, super honored to have Vikash join us, and think it would be great for you to share a little bit of the story of how you started the company, and then just share some insights on navigating MHSRS and working with the Department of Defense.
Well, Liz, what a kind introduction. Thank you so much. And thanks for the chance to join this webinar and share our experience. Actually, if we go to the next slide, please. Yeah, my name's Vikash Goel, like Liz said, founder and CTO of Centerline Biomedical. We are a spin-off company from Cleveland Clinic. So the technology that I developed when I worked there is actually the core of what we are marketing today. Our product is kind of like a GPS system for surgeons to use in minimally invasive vascular surgery. So when they're using, stents and wires and catheters and balloons, like that type of procedure. I had kind of a crazy trajectory to get here. I studied computer science and electrical engineering at Cornell. I got my graduate degree in computer graphics, but I was connected to one of the physicians at Cleveland Clinic. His name was Roy Greenberg. Dr. Greenberg was one of the world's leading endovascular surgeons, really pushing the envelope in this area of clinical work. And so I went from this high-level technical training to being, ears deep in the surgical environment at Cleveland Clinic, learning from this giant in the field and his colleagues. And so our company's technology came out of seeing how hard it is for them to use these X-ray systems that they use right now for these types of surgeries. And we saw that if we took, the technology that exists out there in other fields and adapted it here, we could make something that was better. And so, our technology to improve navigation started out of Dr. Greenberg's vision. We wanted to give them a better way to see, but it's also about improving radiation safety. Right now the X-rays are really, they're exposing patients and caregivers to a lot of radiation. And Dr. Greenberg actually passed away fairly young due to cancer. And that makes us a very mission-driven company. And so, we developed this product. We have it on the market for these civilian needs in vascular surgery, but we've also always seen opportunities to apply that platform to, to other needs, and that includes needs that the Department of Defense has. And so we've been working with G2G for, I think, almost 4 years. I think we first met, Liz, probably about 4 years ago. And we have been benefited greatly from that relationship in a lot of ways, but what I'll focus on here is how that has helped us to connect to stakeholders in the DoD. There is the VA hospital system that's part of the military health system, but what we are actually working on is impacting needs that apply more to the warfighter in the field. But the big question was, how to get partnership and support to explore that. And so I submitted to MHSRS for the first time in 2018 with the help of Liz, Greg, and the rest of their team. And I presented in the poster session that year. The following year, I submitted again. I delivered a speaking presentation. I was selected to present last year, but pandemic. But I still feel honored to have been selected, and I'm definitely hopeful that I'll be presenting again this year. It's a scientific conference, but there's a lot of networking component to it. If you have some science to submit, I highly recommend it. As Greg said, it does need to be science, right? You're not there just to do sales pitches, but the website's a little clunky, but if you have something that you can share that will engage the audience there, it really is worth it. But you do understand, right, that many scientific conferences have this kind of aspect of exposure to new developments and new technologies. And at MHSRS, there actually are a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people in the private sector that present. And so it's not just academics, they want folks like us. They want us out there participating, understanding what the needs are, but also helping them understand what the opportunities for collaboration are, what they can do to help move the state of the art forward. And even if you don't submit, right, there's a lot of opportunity there to build those relationships. Like Liz is saying, relationships are really important. It is a huge conference. There are parallel tracks. You can see who the panelists and speakers are, figure out who you want to target. You might only get like a minute or two with one of them, but making that in-person connection really does affect how productive follow-up is, even if it's all remote after that. And G2G has been really helping us to target the right sessions, target the right people, build those connections, and help follow up as well. And so that has become the beginning of what I think will be probably a long success story here, because we have been successful in developing a partnership in the DoD that has brought us some funding. It did kind of take a circuitous path. All of those stereotypes that about federal government and military, they come from somewhere. But we made contacts at USAMRDC, at the Combat Casualty Care Research Program, the Army Institute of Surgical Research. There are a lot of these acronyms that you start to become facile with. We actually started initially with the Army. Their priorities kind of changed. We ended up teaming up with the Air Force. We were using a vehicle called a CRADA, which I think was on one of Greg's slides earlier. That's this cooperative research and development agreement. It's a great way to get started because it's, one of our colleagues in the Army describes it as kind of a gratuitous agreement. It's really very basic. Pretty quickly, you can get one in place. And it doesn't allow money to change hands, but it allows materials and expertise and time. So, we started developing this research program with this physician at the Army Institute of Surgical Research under this CRADA. When those priorities shifted, we actually started working then with the 59th Medical Wing of the Air Force. And, we can trace all of this back to connections from MHSRS. Once we started with the Air Force there, we had so much support from these people that were really involved and connected with what the needs were, that we were able to parlay that into what we have now, which is a subcontract on a research grant that one of the Air Force physicians is executing. And we fully expect that we'll be able to parlay the success from this project into greater ones. I know I kind of just like spat out a whole long story there, but I think that the key that I want to communicate here is where you have opportunities to make connections to individuals, really take advantage of that, where you have the chance to learn what they're looking for. That is what you need to then turn it into an actual partnership that hopefully can be very fruitful. Would you go to the next slide, please? So yeah, what we have up on screen here, a list of tips, and they're all important. I'll just say a couple of words about each. So, you do want to track the funding opportunities, understand their goals. MHSRS is a really good way to stay plugged in. You start to learn the language, you learn what the key words are, so you know how to say the right thing to the right person. Again, G2G gives us a lot of support on this. It really helps to write a concise white paper, like not a really heavy lift, maybe 1 page front and back, or even one year we did, like, essentially we took our poster and made it a single sheet of paper instead, kind of scaled the right way. But it really helps communicate what you're working on. It gives you something that if desired, a collaborator or potential collaborator can take with them, digest later. So it also is something that some submissions that they start this way. They start with like a white paper. When you do have a program targeted, again, like Liz said, there are some programs that are very broad, like the NSF. They fund, that agency will fund almost anything that's worthwhile in science, but that's not how it is in DoD. They're not just looking to fund cool stuff. They have, the military commands have these defined priorities that start from Congress. They waterfall into the programs. They have specific goals. So don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole. Like, look for a program that really fits, and there are a lot of programs. So make sure that the work you're trying to do actually fits one of their priorities, one of their goals. Make sure your budget guidelines match with, make your proposed budget, make sure it matches with what their guidelines are, what they're expecting. And so talking to the program managers is actually a really good way to make sure you're doing that well. This stuff all interconnects. You having that white paper ready to share, help you understand what they're expecting, build those relationships and talk with them. Make sure that you're putting something in front of them that meets the needs and expectations that they have. The application systems that we've used typically do have this verification period, so you can submit but keep making changes and updates. I highly recommend using that. And we all know things don't always go smoothly the first time that you do something new. So it's helpful to do it early. And of course, don't miss the deadline. I'm really always surprised when I hear that they toss out a lot of applications just because they missed, they were submitted late. Like, to me, that's crazy. Pay attention to these deadlines. And that's actually relevant to the next bullet here too. There are some hoops you have to jump through, and in our case, we'd already done some of them as part of our NIH research grant submissions. And Greg talked about this too, DUNS number, although they are moving away from that, have a CAGE code. EBRAP, that's the electronic submission portal that many of these programs use. SAM, the System for Board Management, make sure you sign up for these well in advance. Some of them can take a while, like they can take weeks to process. And actually, let me just also say, if you haven't used SAM before, there's something that you should know. Registering is free at sam.gov. Renewing every year is free, but somehow there seems like there's this whole industry of like people who reach out to you once a year based on like the fact that you're registered in SAM and try to convince you that they are the official registrars and you have to pay them to renew it. Don't fall for that. So just wanted to share that's something that comes up once a year for us. And so, yeah, so some programs, they start with pre-submissions, and then they invite certain pre-applicants to do full submissions. You really want to do that, because that saves you time if you don't want to put all this work into a big application that's not then going to align with what they're looking for. So do that. Make your best effort to keep them concise, make it easy for the reviewers. Know your audience. You can find out who's running the program, and again, this all connects to understanding the program goals and building relationships, understanding where the priorities come from. Apropos of all of this discussion, right? Don't try to do this in a vacuum. Connect with the stakeholders, the people who want to advance research. the potential beneficiaries of your work. In our experience, those have been the strongest advocates for us within the DoD, the physicians that really want to see this technology out there. And find the right ones that connect to your technology. Again, G2G really helps with that. Our success has hinged on that. So hat tip to my colleagues here for all the support they've given us on that. I guess that's what I've got. Maybe I'll kick this back over to Liz.
Thanks so much, Vikash. That was really helpful, very insightful. I think we can keep moving through the next slide. Just a thank you, and then I think we can take the slide down and just chat. So with our 14 minutes left, just a couple of questions, and I know there are some questions coming through. I would love to ask, because I get this question a lot, Vikash, about applying for DoD funds versus NIH. Are you allowed to do both? How do those two interact with each other?
Oh, absolutely, you can do both, and we do. And I'd probably have to go back and look at the specific details, but my understanding is you could even apply for funding for the same work from more than one agency. You just can't accept funding from more than one agency for the same work. And there is a point in that process where that question will come up. So absolutely, if you think your work is relevant to more than one of these agencies, pursue all of those opportunities.
Okay. And if you could say, what's the one most important thing for people, maybe two most important things for people as they're working on their MHSRS abstracts, what would be the advice there?
What's the one or two most important things? So I will, some of this is repeating what we've already shared in this webinar, but it is important to remember that this is a scientific and academic conference. So that is what you want to present. Your audience will include people who are not scientists, but that it is fundamentally a scientific conference. So don't take the fact that they don't give you a specific format to mean you can just kind of submit whatever you want. But the other thing I'd say is, if it is possible, if you have the chance to speak with a stakeholder in DoD before you make your submission, if you're able to connect with anyone, you learn the right language to use. I used to talk about how we thought our GPS technology, right, you could be used for trauma care. It could be used for these certain needs that are currently not really being met with what's available. But now, after speaking more with the right people, I understand I need to speak about combat casualty care, specifically those three words. I need to talk about prolonged field care. And those keywords are really important.
Yes. Yeah, that's really good advice for people. Well, I'm seeing some questions coming in. So Greg, I'd love for you to just kind of guide us what questions you think we should answer. And I'm sorry if we don't get to all of them. You're welcome to email us if we don't get to your question.
Sure, I'd love to guide that. So one of the questions that come through, what do you think of, and Vikash, this relates to your question about reaching out, and Liz, you've mentioned this too, but what do you think about using a quad chart versus a white paper? Which is preferred?
Well, I'll start, and Vikash, you can join. So the white paper is what we use, and we try to keep it to one page, so short and succinct, to give to the gatekeepers, so that we use those to set up meetings with program managers. And that is the template they're used to. When I worked in government, it was a template used with me. So I think that is sort of the standard. Also, they will keep white papers in their file. So if the broad agency announcement opens up and they get restoral funding, they will go to those white papers first. So that can be really handy. The quad chart is used for the pre-proposal submission. They like to have the quad chart, and then it's 3-4 page for the pre-proposal. And so, yes, they're very used to quad charts to sort of help figure out what a technology does and how it aligns with the military. But I think if you're going in cold, I would start with a white paper, not a quad chart. That would be my thought.
And my answer dovetails very closely with what you said there, Liz. They serve slightly different purposes. And if it's something that you're it's coming cold, it's not part of a submission, the white paper probably is the better way to get across what you're doing. And I say, if you can, be very visual in that white paper, put figures in, because you want it, the same way you think about writing a resume, you want it just to like pop out within a 30-second scan. You want them to get excited.
The other thing I would add to that is, I think researchers sometimes hear white paper and have a different definition of what that is and get freaked out because they think, oh my gosh, that's 10, 20 pages long. And in G2G vernacular, it is one page, maybe two tops, and it goes issue, problem, solution, results. And that issue is the 30-second elevator speech of here's the problem and here's how we're going to solve it. So it's kind of that quick and dirty communication. We have a couple comments that really aren't questions, but I'll just mention this. Somebody had asked, would the slides and the recording be available because they joined late? Yes. Give us a few days to process the recording. We will get that up on our YouTube channel, and we'll share the link to that, and we'll also provide the slides themselves. And then somebody had responded, they sent a link. Is that the correct link? Yes. If you just basically Google MHSRS, that's going to take you right to their website, and you'll be able to see where to submit abstracts.
Their IT can be clunky, so be patient with it. It's worth it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's see. So somebody had asked, are these grants available to companies outside of the US? They have just received their first few 510Ks for their device, and they're looking to start selling in the US market first. So I don't know if Liz or Vikash, either one of you want to tackle that one?
Well, I know if you're getting a grant, they want the research done in the States. So you can be a foreign company, but they want the work done in the States. So that's my understanding.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. I'm only thinking of the particular programs we've applied to and the questions we were asked. They do seem more concerned about where the work is being done because that's what's being funded. And they don't want the funds going overseas, even if the company that's responsible might be.
So Vikash, you talked about science versus sales promotion. Can you talk a little bit about how do you walk the line between science and promoting your product in the abstract?
Yeah, that it can be a bit of a challenge, especially because we do understand that we're going to these conferences to promote what we're doing. And the way that I look at it is there's certainly space in your presentation to to give the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this an opportunity? It's because I have this technology that you haven't seen before, and it does this cool stuff, and it's really visual. So here's a video of it, or I think we've even brought a demo one time. So there's room for that in what's still overall a scientific talk, if the purpose of that is to then set the stage for presenting the science. And then, of course, if the science is good and it supports your product, great, right? But after you complete your scientific presentation, whether it's in the poster session or it's up on the podium, then hopefully you'll approach or be approached by collaborators where you can be a little bit more about looking for people who are responding to the promotion of what you're doing. But you're not, at least when I'm thinking about MHSR specifically, you're not there trying to sell your product. You're there trying to collaborate in any case.
Yep. Great. Someone asked, are the submitted white papers for MHSRS, and I think they might be confusing white papers with abstracts. So are the abstracts to MHSRS kept confidential or public access? And go ahead, Vikash.
You actually, if I remember correctly, you can decide whether you want your abstract to be available afterwards or not.
Okay, great. Let's see. This company has a human skin substitute from soy protein. Wounds heal without scars and cost less. After this very informative presentation, I am more confused than ever. Where do I go to get this researched, used? We cannot afford to attend MHSRS. That's a pretty, that's a very detailed question. So any thoughts there on guidance for this company? Sounds like a small company and needs somewhere to go.
Yeah, I think MRDC would be interested in you, and it's the Combat Casualty Care Office or division that would be the right fit. And then the other would be BARDA, because they do a lot of funding in that space. So those would be my quick response to that very specific question.
Another detailed question, looks like we still have some time. Won't disclosing your science going to interfere with your ability to file patents? Can you talk about the patent process, Vikash, and how you guys have handled that?
Yeah, definitely don't disclose something that you're trying to file a patent on. That should be how you look at it, whether you're presenting at MHSRS or publishing a paper. Yeah, absolutely. Make sure that you have your IP filed, you have your ducks in a row there. If you're working with IP counsel, maybe even make sure they're okay with you disclosing what you do. So the idea behind presenting your science doesn't have to be about the science behind how your device or product or technology works. It can be about what it achieves. And that's how we've done it. So I don't get up on the stage and talk about what went into how our thing works, how it does what it does. I talk about what it allowed physicians to achieve.
Great feedback. Let's see. Someone had asked about MHSRS being canceled last year, and do we think they'd be allowed to submit a poster that was accepted last year?
Okay, I'd be curious to know the answer myself, since I haven't prepared my submission yet this year.
So I would just say that, they have not said you can't. And I've talked to a couple other companies that are like, yeah, I'm either going to submit the same thing, or I'm going to, we've done some work within the last year that has advanced this. And so I'm going to kind of do a hybrid submission where I'm building on what we submitted last year. I guess the only way to find out is if you don't have a ton of time, resubmit it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got a few more seconds here. Are there any constraints on overseas companies participating in MHSRS?
Nope. None. They usually have UK military service speakers as well.
Great. Okay. So we've got a couple more minutes. There is a question here about the VA having over $100 million of external R&D, but does not have an SBIR program. So are there any kind of thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, and it says, have we addressed that? We have not taken that on as something that we've lobbied to change, but it's a good point. We have had conversations with the VA around research, and there has been the feedback that we've gotten is that the system isn't set up like DoD. Like there's no CDMRP program. There's no, they don't have all the labs. They don't have the infrastructure that the DoD has, and that has been a challenge. So that is something that I've heard just from talking with folks within the VA. I think it would be great. We need as many sources as possible for the small businesses. So I love the question and appreciate it very much.
Great. So we've got less than a minute here. If there are any other questions that did not get answered, feel free to reach out to Liz or I or Vikash to get those questions answered. We're happy to talk to you offline, but I want to reserve some time here for any last minute comments from Vikash, any parting words, and then Liz, if you want to bring us to the close.
Well, thanks again, Liz and Greg, for the chance to participate here. To all of the other entrepreneurs on the call, I see us as brethren in arms, and I'd be delighted to meet any or all of you at MHSRS. The work that we do with G2G is really helpful for us, but for all part of a broader community. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Ditto to that. I'm an entrepreneur as well. Thank you all for dialing in. Hopefully this was helpful information. As Greg said, we will make sure you have the link and the slides. And we also constantly update our website with updates on funding opportunities and events. So hopefully that could be a resource as well. And of course, you've got our emails. So thank you again for joining us, and hope you have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.